Take from this world only to the measure of your needs, and forego that which exceedeth them. Observe equity in all your judgments, and transgress not the bounds of justice, nor be of them that stray from its path. Baha'u'llah.
Regard ye the world as a man's body, which is afflicted with diverse ailments, and the recovery of which dependeth upon the harmonizing of all its component elements. Baha'u'llah.
One of the most pressing problems of humanity in the current century is how a growing, rapidly developing, and not yet united global population can, in a just manner, live in harmony with the planet and its finite resources. Certain biological realities present themselves when an organism negatively affects or exceeds the capacity of its ecosystem. The limited availability and inequitable distribution of resources profoundly impact social relations within and between nations in many ways, even to the point of precipitating upheaval and war. And particular arrangements of human affairs can have devastating consequences for the environment. The question of the impact of climate change is today a major aspect of this larger problem. The revelation of Baha'u'llah directly and indirectly touches on a range of such concerns in a manner that speaks to a harmony between society and the natural world. The Universal House of Justice.
Thank you. So today our speaker is Ms. Christine Muller, and she'll be talking about addressing climate change from a spiritual perspective. Ms. Muller graduated from the Music Academy of Basel, Switzerland, with degrees in piano teaching and early music education. She's been a lifelong student of the Baha'i Faith and of the environment. She created an Interfaith Study Course on climate change and co-produced the Story of Stuff, a Baha'i-inspired program for youth. Since 2011, she's served as faculty for the Wilmette Institute courses on climate change and sustainable development. Christine is a board member of RI Interfaith Power&Light and serves as secretary for the Baha'i-inspired International Environment Forum. So with that, I'll hand it off to Ms. Muller.
Thank you very much, Wilmette, for your kind introduction. And thank you for the Baha'i family for inviting me to speak at your fireside. So Amin asked me to first provide a brief introduction before going into today's topic of addressing climate change from a spiritual perspective. I heard about the Baha'i Faith when I was 16 years old, at a time when I was seriously seeking for a purpose in life. I was also pessimistic about the many social and environmental problems facing humanity. When my mother started to read a Baha'i book, I was suspicious at first and was afraid that she might get into a weird cult. I decided to read the book and then to just talk my mother out of it. What a presumptuous attitude, but well, I was a teenager. So I read the book, which mainly talked about the worldview of a Baha'i and the attitude of a Baha'i towards life. I specifically remember the passages that explained the meaning of work. Work done in a spirit of service is considered worship. The book calmed me down. This was obviously not a cult, and it didn't seem to contain any dangerous teachings. One easy indicator was that there was no money trap. In fact, only Baha'is are permitted to give to Baha'i funds, and all donations by Baha'is are voluntary and anonymous. So I thought that it was okay for my mother to pursue this. At the same time, I also got curious because I liked what I read. For example, the teaching of the oneness of humankind and that we must abandon prejudices of all kinds. The Baha'i writings also answered my questions about the meaning of life and gave me hope because they address the world's manifold problems from a spiritual perspective. So I became a Baha'i at the age of 17. Growing up in the small country of Switzerland during an economic boom, I closely experienced the destruction of the natural world. About 20 years ago, I became so concerned that I studied the science of climate change, its causes and impacts, what must be done about it, and how the Baha'i teachings can help address this huge threat to humankind. I will now share with you briefly what I found. Okay, I think that should work now. So there is now overwhelming scientific evidence that the Earth has been warming and that human activities have been the major contributor to that warming. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, our planet has warmed on average about 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is 2 degrees Fahrenheit. This seemingly little warming has already significantly changed the climate on our planet. For example, heat waves have become more severe and longer. This past summer, record high July temperatures were observed in parts of North and South America, Southern and Eastern Asia, as well as parts of the Western and Southern Pacific Ocean, and an unprecedented heat wave affected much of Europe and the United Kingdom. Droughts are worsening with harmful effects on agriculture, and deserts are expanding. This creates conditions favorable to wildfires, which have become worse all over the world. Water scarcity has been increasing in many parts of the world. The polar ice caps are melting at a much faster rate than scientists predicted even a few years ago. That's because the warming is not evenly distributed. The poles are warming 3 times faster than the rest of the world. Glaciers are melting everywhere, and sea levels are rising. That's because of 2 reasons. One is the influx of fresh water from the melting ice, and the other one is thermal expansion. As water warms, it expands. 93% of the sun's energy goes into the water. Sea level rise is an immediate danger for many small islands and are an increasingly huge threat for many large coastal cities, such as Gwangju, Manhattan, Mumbai, and Calcutta, and many others. Storms have become stronger and more destructive. That's because winds are picking up more energy from warmer ocean water. High sea levels can also make storm surges stronger. On the left, you see 2 pictures from Florida after the recent Hurricane Ian, and on the right, you see the devastation of a cyclone in Tacloban City in the Philippines in 2013. There is more evaporation with warmer temperatures, and warmer air can hold more water vapor. That's why there is often much heavier precipitation, both as rain or snow. Therefore, floods are becoming more severe and frequent in many parts of the world. 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater this past summer. The flood was caused by unprecedented monsoon rainfall and glacial melting. It has killed over 1,000 people and destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes and millions of acres of cropland. It affected more than 30 million Pakistanis and caused billions of dollars in damage. Warmer weather has allowed vectors such as mosquitoes to multiply and to expand their habitat ranges. Mosquito-related diseases such as malaria, dengue, yellow fever, and Zika virus have been spreading. Ticks can also carry pathogens, and the spread of Lyme disease in recent decades is well documented as well. Extreme heat, drought and famine, and sea level rise are already forcing 20 million people to leave their homes every year. They become internally displaced or migrate towards neighboring countries. By different estimates, the disrupted climate could displace 260 million to 1.2 billion people by 2050. These increasing numbers of refugees have the potential to destabilize even well-organized countries and could lead to more conflicts. Of course, climate change also affects plants and animals and disrupts the delicate balance of ecosystems. It is one of the causes for the enormous loss of animals and plants. Since 1970, wildlife populations have plummeted by 69%. The web of life on which we all depend is unraveling. Coral reefs are dying. Corals are very sensitive to temperature rises. On top of that comes the acidification of the ocean. The ocean has been absorbing some of the increased CO2 from our burning of fossil fuels, and this CO2 makes the water more acidic. Corals are also suffering from runoff from agriculture and other pollution. In addition to their intrinsic value, coral reefs are important for fisheries, and their disappearance has serious consequences for people's livelihoods and food security. So, why is the Earth getting warmer? To understand global warming, we need to know about the greenhouse effect. Scientists have known about the greenhouse effect since the 19th century. The sun's energy enters the atmosphere in the form of light waves. That energy warms the Earth and then is re-radiated back into space in the form of infrared long-wave radiation. Certain gases in the atmosphere trap a portion of the outgoing radiation. These gases are often called greenhouse gases. They are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, water vapor, and some others. Only thanks to this greenhouse effect is life on Earth possible, because it has kept the average surface temperature at about 14 degrees Celsius, which is 58 degrees Fahrenheit. CO2 is the most important greenhouse gas. Here you can see atmospheric CO2 concentrations in the past 10,000 years until the present time. Continuing with business as usual will result in very serious and irreversible climatic changes that can be catastrophic. So where do these greenhouse gases come from? The main source is from our burning of fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and gas. Deforestation is another reason, as well as unsustainable agricultural methods and livestock raising. That is why climate change is a very difficult issue to tackle. If we want to limit further global heating and keep the Earth a friendly place for life, we need to change almost all human activities. We must quickly transition to clean energy. We need to change agricultural practices and the whole food production system. And we need to transform our transportation system, etc. Actions are needed on all levels: international, national, local, and individual. Scientists consider a warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius already as very dangerous, but unavoidable. A 2 degrees Celsius warming would be devastating for agriculture and for fisheries, and seriously threaten global food security. The scientific community now considers a 2 degrees Celsius warming as extremely dangerous for human civilization. If all 193 countries faithfully implemented their climate pledges made as part of the Paris Agreement, the world would warm about 2.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. However, a warming of 2.5 degrees Celsius would seriously imperil human civilization. Unfortunately, countries are not even on track with reducing their promised greenhouse gas emissions, and the current trajectory would bring us to a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world by 2100. In order to avoid the worst impacts, global greenhouse gas emissions will need to decline by 43% by 2030, falling to net zero by 2050. But current national commitments do not meet this requirement and point to a nearly 14% increase by 2030, instead of the sharp decline required to limit warming to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. This is the most enormous challenge humanity has ever faced. Many scientists doubt that keeping the Earth from warming more than 1.5 degrees Celsius is still realistic. But most scientists believe that it is technically still possible to keep the Earth below 2 degrees Celsius. However, the actions required are drastic and require concerted efforts that are unprecedented in magnitude. This past Monday, at the 27th UN Climate Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator." There are now increasing numbers of people who believe that all hope is lost. This is understandable when looking only at climate science, at the increasingly worsening climate change impacts, and at the inertia of humans to take action. Moreover, we can expect that increasingly severe climate change impacts will converge with other worsening social and environmental problems, which will result in a major crisis, possibly even in a collapse of human civilization. So let's take a step back and look at human history. Major transformations in human mindsets and cultures happened through the world's great religions. The Baha'i Faith teaches that throughout human history, the creator of the universe has provided teachings that guide humans in their relationship with each other and with nature by sending prophets such as Abraham, Krishna, Buddha, Moses, Christ, and Mohammed. They all motivated individuals to grow spiritually and to live ethically, and they inspired new flourishing civilizations. Today, humankind is threatened by many serious social and environmental problems, climate change being one of the most dangerous. Would we not expect further divine guidance for our age at a time when the very survival of humankind is at stake? Baha'is believe that God did indeed send us a new prophet, Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. He lived in Iran until the government banished him from his native country. His long exile brought him to Baghdad, Istanbul, and as a final destination to the prison city of Akko in the Holy Land. At that time, all these places were still untouched by the industrialization going on in Europe. Baha'u'llah wrote, "Each one of the ordinances we have revealed is a mighty stronghold for the preservation of the world of being." Each one of the ordinances we have revealed is a mighty stronghold for the preservation of the world of being. These are powerful and hopeful words because climate change is threatening the world of being. So this evening, we will examine how the teachings of Baha'u'llah can help humanity to properly address climate change. Of course, I will not be able to talk about all the Baha'i teachings, but you are welcome to bring up some others during our conversation. Some of these teachings are also part of other religions. That's not surprising because they all come from the same source. Let us first look at human relationship with nature. Stewardship of the earth is one of the teachings which you can find in all religions. Jewish scriptures say, when God created the first human beings, God led them around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, "See my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. Think of this and do not corrupt or destroy my world." Baha'u'llah explained, nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. If nature is God's creation, we should not destroy it. All human beings, plants and animals are God's creation and will. A closely related aspect is human interconnectedness with nature. In the past decades, we have acted based on the illusion that we humans are separate and independent from nature. Now we need to realize that we are part of the web of life and cannot control nature or each other through violence. We are all connected to each other and to all living beings. Most of our actions have a direct or indirect impact on other people, on plants, animals, and the climate. We have seriously degraded this web of life and disrupted the balance in the Earth's natural systems. The Baha'i teachings explain, reflect upon the inner realities of the universe. Every part of the universe is connected with every other part by ties that are very powerful and admit of no imbalance. The elements and lower organisms are synchronized in the great plan of life. Shall man, infinitely above them in degree, be antagonistic and a destroyer of that perfection? The Baha'i international community elaborated on that concept. As trustees or stewards of the planet's vast resources and biological diversity, humanity must learn to make use of the Earth's natural resources, both renewable and non-renewable, in a manner that ensures sustainability and equity into the distant reaches of time. This attitude of stewardship will require full consideration of the potential environmental consequences of all development activities. It will compel humanity to temper its actions with moderation and humility, realizing that the true value of nature cannot be expressed in economic terms. It will also require a deep understanding of the natural world and its role in humanity's collective development, both material and spiritual. Therefore, sustainable environmental management must come to be seen not as a discretionary commitment mankind can weigh against other competing interests, but rather as a fundamental responsibility that must be shouldered, a prerequisite for spiritual development, as well as the individual's physical survival. Human actions are destroying the balance in nature with serious consequences, not only for plants and animals, but for human life. A deep insight into the interconnectedness of all life is fundamentally important when tackling the complex problem of climate change. This brings us to a new concept in religious history. The Baha'i Faith teaches that we need to rely on both science and religion, and that these two must be in harmony. Science and religion are tools to investigate reality from two different angles. Science asks, how does the universe work? Religion asks, why is there a universe? And what is its purpose? And what is our purpose of existence as human beings? How can we apply this teaching to climate change? Science can explain the causes of global warming and can project with various amounts of certainty the impacts of the resulting changes in climate. Science and technology can also provide some technical solutions. Then, however, it is up to the public and to politicians to consider scientific facts, to apply values, and then to act accordingly. And the values come from religion. Climate change is often perceived as just an environmental problem. However, it is very much a human problem, a social issue. The poor of the world are generally first and most severely affected by climate change, such as farmers in Africa or people in Bangladesh who are threatened by sea level rise. Or think of the people living on small islands that will have to leave their homes and lose their cultures because of sea level rise. In general, one can say that those most vulnerable to climate change are often least able to afford adaptation measures such as dikes, irrigation to compensate for droughts, or moving away from flood or storm-prone areas. Even in the developed countries are the poor first at risk from the impacts of climate change. Poor people are the most affected by rising food prices or by dislocation because of severe storms. The executive director of Oxfam International said, "Climate change is the central poverty issue of our times. Climate change is happening today, and the world's poorest people who already face a daily struggle to survive are being hit hardest." Poverty alleviation is a central teaching in all religions. The Bible teaches, "Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." And Baha'u'llah wrote, "O ye rich ones on earth, the poor in your midst are my trust. Guard ye my trust, and be not intent only on your own ease." In the Baha'i Faith, there is an added dimension to that. Baha'u'llah calls not only for the eradication of poverty, but also of extreme wealth. Eliminating the extremes of wealth is important for climate change mitigation because the rich people of the world are the ones who are responsible for most of the carbon pollution in our atmosphere. This graph shows the annual emissions of top emitters. You can see how China's emissions have grown tremendously in recent decades. However, this issue is quite complex. When we look at emissions per capita, per person, the picture is quite different. You can see how much more CO2 the average American is emitting compared to other people. You can also see that emissions in the US and the European Union have been declining. However, this issue is even more complex. The mining of resources and the production of goods have increasingly been taking place in developing nations. On this slide, you can see the major flows from the areas of production to the countries of consumption. So while China's emissions have been growing rapidly, the consumption of the West is partly to blame for that increase. We also need to be aware that there is a small number of extremely rich people all over the world who are consuming much of the world's resources and cause more than their fair share of emissions. Here you see the disparity of poverty and wealth illustrated. 68.7% More than 2/3 of the world's people own together only 3% of the world's wealth. The top 8.5% of the world owns 83%. Wealth is a major cause of global warming because of the huge consumption of the rich. The Baha'i teachings contain provisions that would limit the accumulation of extreme wealth, but encourage individuals to acquire wealth to spend it for their own needs and for the common good. For example, they suggest very progressive taxes. Since poor people suffer first and the most from climate change impacts, and since the activities of the rich people are responsible for the warming of the earth, climate change is foremost an issue of justice. Another aspect of justice is the responsibility for reducing emissions. On this slide, you can see the historical CO2 emissions from different countries. These emissions raise the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere for a very long time. Historically, the European Union and the United States certainly bear most responsibility. Therefore, this is also an issue of justice between developed and developing nations. By far the greatest justice issue is the fate of our children, grandchildren, and generations to come. What kind of a planet are we leaving to them? This is called intergenerational justice, justice between generations. Young people all over the world are beginning to understand how much their future is in danger because of climate change, and they are speaking out. It is imperative to uphold justice in all political and economic decisions. Baha'u'llah said, "No light can compare with the light of justice." The establishment of order in the world and the tranquility of the nations depend upon it. And the Baha'i writings further say, "We ask God to endow human souls with justice, so that they may be fair and may strive to provide for the comfort of all, that each member of humanity may pass his life in the utmost comfort and welfare." It is very relevant to our topic that Baha'u'llah directly connects justice to moderation. Whoso cleaveth to justice can, under no circumstances, transgress the limits of moderation. The civilization, so often vaunted by the learned exponents of arts and sciences, will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. If carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it had been of goodness when kept within the restraints of moderation. It is impossible to have perpetual economic growth in a finite biosphere. We need to learn to accept the limits of our planet. In the past, it was justified to consider a growing economy as desirable progress. And this still holds true for many people and countries of the world. However, for the rich countries and for the planet as a whole, we have reached the limits of growth. In fact, we have already surpassed them. The current capitalistic economy exploits the earth and destroys its life support systems. It also exploits many people and exacerbates the extremes of wealth and poverty. The baseline for a sustainable economy should be the carrying capacity of the earth. In other words, we cannot continue to produce more and more stuff. However, many people are not connected to a higher purpose in life and therefore fill their inner emptiness with material things. This materialism results in excessive consumption. Millions of people try to find meaning in their lives by shopping and owning. One scholar even called consumerism the first global religion. However, several scientific studies indicate that once basic needs are met, human beings don't increase their life satisfaction or happiness by accumulating greater wealth. On a finite planet, it is no longer possible to satisfy everybody's wants. The goal should be to provide for the needs of all people and to improve the quality of life for everyone. Gandhi said, "The earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed." That's why the teachings about moderation and the spiritual meaning of life can help us overcome our destructive addiction to stuff. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "The Universal House of Justice is the international governing institution of the global Baha'i community." And it wrote, "At all times, contentment and moderation, benevolence and fellow feeling, sacrifice and reliance on the Almighty are qualities that befit the God-fearing soul. The forces of materialism promote a quite contrary line of thinking, that happiness comes from constant acquisition, that the more one has, the better, that worry for the environment is for another day. Spirituality is the remedy for materialism and consumerism. A spiritual outlook can help us shift the emphasis from consumption to well-being and a meaningful life. The Baha'i writings say, "Man is in reality a spiritual being, and only when he lives in the spirit is he truly happy." Baha'u'llah calls us to live a life of contentment. Take from this world only to the measure of your needs, and forego that which exceedeth them. And in the next sentence, he connects contentment again with justice. Observe equity in all your judgments, and transgress not the bounds of justice, nor be of them that stray from its path. Justice, moderation, and contentment are not abstract concepts. They need to be applied in daily action. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "Every choice a Baha'i makes, as employee or employer, producer or consumer, borrower or lender, benefactor or beneficiary, leaves a trace, and the moral duty to lead a coherent life demands that one's economic decisions be in accordance with lofty ideals, that the purity of one's aims be matched by the purity of one's actions to fulfill those aims." The central Baha'i teaching is the oneness of humankind, that all human beings are equal, that there is only one race, the human race, and that this is the age in which we must learn to live together like one global family. Several other teachings are connected to that overall theme. Most important is the abandonment of all prejudices. Recognition of this truth requires abandonment of prejudice of every kind: race, class, color, creed, nation, sex, degree of material civilization, everything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. Racism plays a role at the beginning and at the end of the climate change problem. First, people of color are more likely to live in a neighborhood close to a coal-fired power plant, an industrial complex that releases toxic chemicals, a landfill, or even a hazardous waste facility. The air they breathe, and the water they drink are more likely polluted than in a predominantly white suburb. That is certainly one of several reasons why proportionally more African Americans and Latinos have died from COVID-19. At the same time, this air pollution contributes to global warming. Then, of course, people of color are also more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as heat waves in their polluted neighborhoods, storms, and rising food prices. And on top of all that, the voice of people of color is often not represented in decision-making because of discriminatory practices. The principle of the oneness of humankind does not only uphold the equality of all beings, it is of all human beings, it is also the ultimate goal to be realized. Baha'u'llah said, "Take pride not in love for yourselves, but in love for your fellow creatures. Glory not in love for your country, but in love for all mankind." The deep belief in the oneness of humankind is essential to effectively address climate change in two ways. The principle of the oneness of humankind helps us as individuals to understand that my every actions affect my brothers and sisters all around the world. This attitude will change the way we live and what we consume as individuals. Applying the principle of the oneness of mankind on the societal level is a prerequisite to address nationalism and is the foundation for global governance. And all this is very important for effective climate action. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "The welfare of any segment of humanity is inextricably bound up with the welfare of the whole. Humanity's collective life suffers when any one group thinks of its own well-being in isolation from that of its neighbors, or pursues economic gain without regard for how the natural environment, which provides sustenance for all, is affected." Baha'u'llah said, "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established." The Earth Charter clearly spells out the need for the unification of humankind. The choice is ours: form a global partnership to care for Earth and one another, or risk the destruction of ourselves and the diversity of life. As we can see from the outcome of a series of international climate conferences, our global human family is paralyzed by nationalistic and short-term self-interest. It is unlikely that the required major transformation of society can be achieved within the existing systems of political and economic thinking. We need to make a transition from thinking in terms of nation states to world citizenship. Baha'u'llah said, "The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." Embracing the concept of the oneness of humanity will change our perspective of climate mitigation efforts in many ways. For example, compensation for loss and damage suffered by poor countries most vulnerable to climate change has been a contentious issue in international climate negotiations, because the developed countries, who are responsible for most of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, have resisted to pay for the harm they caused. They argue that it could impact their economy. Such reasoning will stop when we regard the world as just one country and humankind as one family. We equally value the lives of people in other countries who may often be poor or of a different race. Moreover, the environmental crisis demands that all of humanity work together to implement solutions. The solution to climate change exceeds the capacities and resources of any one nation and requires the full cooperation of all nations, each according to their means. Strong and enforceable laws need to be created to limit greenhouse gas emissions, not only on the local and national level, but also on the international level. There is a desperate need for global environmental governance. Pollution has no boundaries. Baha'u'llah called for the establishment of a World Federation of Nations with its own legislative, judicial, and executive bodies. Such a world order is not only new in that it encompasses all of humankind, but also new in the underlying philosophy. The first priority is the well-being of everyone on the planet. National, regional, and local interests are respected, but are considered in the light of humankind being one family. This view is the opposite of nationalism, which has been the stumbling block to all international climate negotiations. This new world order is very balanced. It also promotes decentralization and empowerment of people at the grassroots. All people need to have a voice in the decisions that will affect their lives. Minorities and women must be especially empowered to take part in all plans for sustainable development. The knowledge and experience of indigenous peoples is essential in that process. Indigenous people all over the world have been at the forefront of calling for climate action and for protecting forests and water. Development projects have proven to be much more beneficial if the knowledge and experience of the local population are incorporated. The Baha'i international community explained, top-down models of community development can no longer adequately respond to modern-day needs and aspirations. The world community must move toward more participatory, knowledge-based, and values-driven systems of governance in which people can assume responsibility for the processes and institutions that affect their lives. These systems need to be democratic in spirit and method and must emerge on all levels of world society, including the global level. Consultation, the operating expression of justice in human affairs, should become their primary mode of decision-making. Consultation is a spiritual method of decision-making and is one of the fundamental Baha'i teachings. The reason why current politics are not helping humanity advance is that politicians are usually driven by vested interests and ideologies. They are only concerned about their party's or their country's national interests. In addition, they have a very short time horizon, usually just to the next election. But our actions today will affect the climate for many hundreds, even thousands of years. It is also seen as a sign of strength not to change one's opinion. The method of Baha'i consultation works in a very different way. Individuals participating in consultation have the common good in mind and are open to give up their personal points of view when others present facts or different perspectives that may be better. This requires the conquering of the ego and therefore spiritual development. But this is the only way to arrive at decisions that are really in the best interest of everyone. Moreover, this principle of consultation also includes that majority decisions are supported even by the minority who may have voted against it. This method of consultation requires a certain spiritual maturity, but it is very effective in finding good solutions and in bringing people together in unified action. This is sorely needed in our time when societies are becoming increasingly divided. Already in 1981, the Universal House of Justice stated, "Until such time as the nations of the world understand and follow the admonitions of Baha'u'llah to wholeheartedly work together in looking after the best interests of all humankind and unite in the search for ways and means to meet the many environmental problems besetting our planet, little progress will be made towards their solution." Climate change requires very fundamental changes in almost all human activities, as well as some sacrifice by the rich people of the world. Such profound change requires a fundamental change in consciousness. Humanity's crying need calls for a fundamental change of consciousness, that the time has come when each human being on Earth must learn to accept responsibility for the welfare of the entire human family. Imagine a society where the well-being of all of humankind is the first priority in all decisions made by individuals, institutions, politicians, governments, and businesses. Perhaps we can summarize the Baha'i teachings with this quotation from Baha'u'llah: "Let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self." Focusing on the common good, on the well-being of everyone, is important for us as individuals to lead a meaningful life. And it is essential for humanity to address climate change and other critical environmental and social problems. These were a few examples of how we can apply the Baha'i teachings to address climate change from the root. There are many other Baha'i teachings that are relevant to addressing climate change, such as the equality of men and women, or the high importance of trustworthiness. Perhaps we can get to them during our conversation. Of course, Baha'is, together with our friends, are still very much in the process of learning about climate change and how we can contribute to raising consciousness about it in public discourse, how we can practically get involved in social action, how we can relate the Baha'i teachings to the environmental crisis, and how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our personal lives and our community activities. And this brings us to one more Baha'i teaching. Baha'u'llah said, "Let deeds, not words, be your adorning." In summary, the Baha'i teachings can provide an ethical framework to address climate change and the motivation to work for harmony among people and with nature. And most importantly, they provide a vision of a spiritual, just, and sustainable society worth working for. So I thank you all for listening so patiently, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you so much on speaking on such a urgent, arguably the most urgent issue facing the world. So thank you so much. So we have some time for questions. Everyone can put their questions in the chat. The first question is, there are some post-medieval diarists from Basel, Thomas Platter the Elder and his two sons, Felix Platter and Thomas Platter the Younger. Though I can't locate where I read it, one of the sons observed the effects of climate change when studying in Montpellier, France. And they're asking if you know something about that.
I'm very sorry, I don't know about that. But it's something I want to investigate. It's really interesting because they are from my home city. I pursue it, but I cannot comment on it. I'm sorry.
No worries, thank you. The next question is about the climate conference in Egypt. Do you feel that the governments attending can truly move their nations to make the changes necessary, or do you think climate change is more of a ground-up movement by young people?
Well, it is both. it is very difficult. I did not have the time to follow COP27 in details this week. And they are still, it's not done yet. So we don't really know yet what's going to happen, and I don't know the details. But what happens at this conference, when you look back at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, at that time, the nations of the world for the first time agreed to have an agreement that is productive. Even the Universal House of Justice said that is like a first step towards human unification. I can't remember its exact words, but it was an important step in humanity's development, that Paris Agreement. However, the nationally determined contributions, these are contributions that each country came up with, and these are voluntary. They were weak, and also the countries have not really followed up implementing them faithfully. So we are falling short with the Paris Agreement. And especially there is one point, which is the loss and damage, which was always first not even allowed to be discussed by the developed countries. But now at this COP27, it is for the first time, this is a central issue. So the best we can hope is that COP27 brings some commitment from the developed nations to give money to those who are suffering the most from climate change, who have suffered in the past already and will suffer even more in the future, so they can adapt to the changes.
Thank you. Do you think that the countries that have caused climate change should fix it rather than pay, since they have the people who are able to do this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just financial support, but it's also technological support. And in some ways, that's already happening. There is some technology transfer, but of course, it's not sufficient. Yeah. And not only technology, it's also science, like agricultural methods. It's a lot of things, and renewable energy, many aspects.
Which principle do you think is most effective in motivating us to deal with climate change, and how can this principle be commonly realized?
Well, I think it is really the view, let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self. That really holds the secret, I think, because if we are all just focused on the well-being of humankind on all levels, individuals, but countries, everyone wants to do the best for the well-being of all of humankind, then we will tackle climate change very strongly. We would have very effective actions, but it would be difficult. And one thing which I did not address, and it's very difficult to talk about this topic in a short time, but one issue is when we transition to a sustainable economy, we have to be very careful that we don't hurt poor people. For example, what we really need is a carbon tax. We need that. Yeah, we need to, the polluters need to pay. But you cannot just from one day to the next institute a high carbon tax, because then poor people will be affected the most. The rich can just pay it and continue their polluting lifestyles. But there are ways of doing this, such as, for example, distributing the carbon tax to the population. There are ways of doing it. I don't advocate for any specific measure, but there are ways that humanity can consult and find find ways of doing it in a just way.
What can we do in our daily lives to help fight climate change?
Oh, we can do so much. So, for example, let's start with food. We can eat lower on the food chain, so less animal products. Because the worst is, sorry, beef, because the cows, they emit methane. And methane, and that's because they are ruminators. You know, they have a specific digestive system. And so they release methane. And methane is more than 80 times as strong as a greenhouse gas than CO2. Now, of course, you know, if there was just one person eating beef, it would not be a problem. The problem is that we have these huge factories with thousands of animals, you know, and all over the world, and it is a major problem. So eating lower on the food chain, including dairy, it also comes from cows, you know, it really helps. Just eat less, and you don't have to become fanatical, you know, just gradually. Maybe if you eat beef every day, now eat it every second day. If you eat it once a week, eat it only once a month, you know, just reduce and continue to reduce until you feel good about it. And by the way, in the Baha'i Faith, there is also the somehow the prediction that in the future humanity will all eat vegetarian, which is kind of interesting. So, but there are other things we can do, and I think the most important thing is to buy less things, because everything that is produced comes at an environmental cost. Its production uses energy, and the energy is usually associated with greenhouse gas emissions, and it also uses natural resources and causes pollution. Often it also causes social injustices when people are exploited. So just reducing what we shop is a great help. And then, you know, try to only drive when you absolutely need, and only fly when you need to fly. There are good reasons why we still need to fly, but just to go for a vacation, I don't know, in our age, I personally don't feel good about that. So transportation and the energy use. One very easy thing is, you know, in most places, at least in the developed world, you can buy green energy. You have to investigate with your energy supplier, but you can buy green energy. It's a little bit more expensive, but if you reduce your energy consumption, it's a win-win for the environment, because you reduce your energy consumption, plus it is green, so your budget will stay about the same, but it helps the environment. Are there other things? Yeah, I mean, there's numerous things. Of course, like people always think about recycling. Of course, you should recycle, especially electronics and things like that. You should recycle. But more important than recycling is just don't buy things. So reuse things as much as you can. And there are thousands of possibilities, you know, so I cannot list them all, but there are internet resources, and also I can provide you in the chat. I can try that link. There is an interfaith course on climate change with a Baha'i perspective on the website of the Baha'i-inspired International Environment Forum. And one of the classes is about, how to practically reduce your carbon footprint. So one of the classes is about practical solutions. Another one is about spiritual, like individual spiritual development. And then another one is about ethical teachings and things like that.
Can you comment on why when people talk about climate change, they don't put emphasis on the effects of the wars around the world or exploring outer space, those types of things?
I've wondered about that myself. War, of course, has a devastating impact. I mean, first on the people, but it's afterwards, when you just look at the climate impact, it's all the weapons, it's fossil fuels that are being burned. It all goes up in the air. And then the destruction of things will require the building of new things. So that will again require energy and resources as well. And I agree that with space travel or space exploration, I think scientifically there are merits. I think we should not just say, okay, we don't do any science anymore in space. That may be too fanatical, but I think we should be very moderate in that. And any commercial or touristic views on that, I think is just not responsible. I agree.
Do you think the carbon tax should be paid by the very rich who are benefiting from the companies they created that are causing the problems?
Yes, sure. Yeah. And it's polluters need to pay, and also it will help if we have an economy where very polluting items, let's say food that comes from far away and has to be transported, and this may be unsustainably produced. If that food is taxed very heavily, people will also not buy it as much, and they will buy more local food and more the food that is in season, which is also healthier for individuals. Like it's healthier for your body. Actually, a lot of things, I forgot to say that before, like eating less beef is also healthy for you, because it's not only the beef itself that has, too much is not good for you, but the way it is produced. You cannot say raised in this country, but the way it is produced is not only cruel to the animals, but it's very unhealthy for the people, because it's full of hormones and antibiotics. And so you really don't want to eat that stuff. But sorry, I got carried away. What was, did I answer that question?
Yeah, it was just about the carbon tax. Like, should the rich pay for that?
Yes, yeah, right.
Has the Baha'i international community's statements during this particular summit been effective to change the nation's vision and mind?
I know that the Baha'i international community is represented, or a delegation went to Egypt. Now, at these COPs, conferences of the parties that discuss climate change, there is an informal program and a formal program. And the formal program is attended by the delegates of the countries, and they make the decisions. And then there is an informal program that contains, thousands and thousands of events. And it includes civil society, and they have some impact. And the Baha'i international community wrote a statement, and I think that's what Baha'i was referring to, the statement, "One planet, one habitation, a Baha'is perspective on human relationship with the natural world." And you can find this on the Baha'i International Community website. I think it's BIC.org, or on the website of the International Environment Forum as well. And this is a fantastic statement, and it will help if we promote it, if we study it together and as individuals. It's a wonderful statement, and it does help. You know, all of these statements do help, and I think that Baha'i teachings have already had some influence in the thinking of some of the people who make decisions on the international level. So I think there is some progress.
Great. Okay, it looks like those are all of our questions. So thank you, Ms. Muller, for this talk. Thank you so much.
Great. I thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for all the many good questions. Thanks for participating.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your questions. So our speaker next week will be Mr. John Hawkness, and his topic will be "How do Baha'is bury their dead?" So again, these happen every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I've put the link to our contact form on our YouTube channel in the chat if you're not already subscribed. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next Saturday. Bye.